Welcome. Today we're discussing E. Lockhart's The Disreputable History of Frankie Landau-Banks, a finalist for the National Book Award in Young People's Literature, and an honor book for the Michael L. Prince Award, which is given by the American Library Association to the best book for teens. We're discussing the novel up through A Broken Date, page 178. If you have not read up to page 178, then press pause and read up to page 178. The video will still be here when you return. Okay, let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. Let's start with an exercise in close reading. The question I have for you is, how does the novel's opening position you, the reader of the novel? It begins with a piece of evidence. December 14th, 2007. To Headmaster Richmond and the Board of Directors, Alabaster Preparatory Academy. I, Frankie Landau-Banks, hereby confess that I was the sole mastermind behind the maldoings of the Loyal Order of the Basset Hounds. I take full responsibility for disruptions caused by the order, including the library lady, the doggies in the window, the night of 1,000 dogs, the Can Beat Rebellion, and the abduction of the guppy. That is, I wrote the directives telling everyone what to do. I and I alone. No matter what Porter Welsh told you in his statement. Of course, the dogs of the order are human beings with free will. They contributed their labor under no explicit compunction. I did not threaten them or coerce them in any way, and if they chose to follow my instructions, it was not because they feared retribution. You have requested that I provide you with their names. I respectfully decline to do so. It's not for me to pugn or impugn their characters. I would like to point out that many of the Order's escapades were intended as social criticism, and that many of the Order's members were probably diverted from more self-destructive behaviors by the activities prescribed them by me. So maybe my actions contributed to a larger good, despite the inconveniences you, no doubt, suffered. I do understand the administration's disgruntlement over the incidents. I see my behavior disrupted the smooth running of your patriarchal establishment. And yet, I would like to suggest that you view each of the Loyal Order's projects with the gruntlement that should attend the creative civil disobedience of students who are politically aware and artistically expressive. I am not asking that you indulge my behavior, merely that you do not indulge it without considering its context. Yours sincerely, Frances Rose Landau-Banks, Class of 2010. What key words or phrases are used in that opening letter? And why? Go ahead, circle what you think the key words or phrases are and speculate on why they're there. What questions does the letter raise about the novel that you are about to read? What clues does the letter give you for the novel that you are about to read? And where does the letter position you in relation to the novel's main character, Frankie Landau-Banks? What sort of relationship does it invite? Are you sympathetic? Unsympathetic? Curious? Skeptical? What? All right, press pause and sketch out some answers to those questions, referring to specifics in that opening letter. Actually quote the opening letter in your response. Feel free to refer to moments beyond that opening letter too. Don't forget, we have read up through page 178. Okay, press pause. Write a bit. I'm going to assume that you are finished now and begin the second question. So, in our last class, I invited you to compare this novel to this one. If this were an in-person class, I would now invite you to pursue that comparison in person. And I would write down some of the ideas on the board and then we would talk about those ideas. As my disembodied head, well, disembodied upper torso, really, as that indicates, I am coming to you via this video, and so we can't quite do that. But we can take a moment and jot down a couple of features that these books have in common, and a couple of features where they differ. So do that, hit pause, I'll wait. I would guess that some similarities include prep school. Indeed, prep school in the northeastern United States. Pensy Prep is in Pennsylvania, and Alabaster Prep is in Massachusetts. Class, Holden and Frankie have access to more capital than most. Race, both main characters are white. Coming of age. On pages 4 to 5, we learn that Frankie, quote, gained 4 inches and 20 pounds, all in the right places. Quote, she grew into her angular face, filled out her figure, and transformed from a homely child into a loaded potato. On page 5 of The Catcher in the Rye, we learn that Holden grew 6.5 inches last year. Narrative frame. Both novels are looking back on events that have happened. On page 1, Holden hints that he's in a mental hospital. And then Frankie's note serves as prologue to her story. Skeptical attitude towards some types of authority. That's not a complete list of similarities, I know. And you may have written down ones that I didn't write down here, which is my fault. But it's a start. I would guess that some differences might include the age of the novel and the recency of the events in that novel. This novel was published in 2008, and Salinger's novel was published in 1951. Gender, though both characters have masculine names, Holden is a boy, Frankie is a girl, I would suggest that that perspective influences the way these stories are told. Speaking of perspective, narrative voice. The Catcher in the Rye is very famously first person. I, Holden speaking. The disreputable history of Frankie Landau-Banks is third person. He, she, it. Frankie, right? The narrator is speaking. But it's a fairly intimate third person narrator. It's frequently offering you first person access to the mind of Frankie Landau-Banks. And there's a name for that. And that name is free indirect discourse, or style indirect libre, if you speak French, which I don't, as you can tell from my accent. A third-person narrator that offers access to a first-person point of view, which is useful, right? Because it allows you to move in and out of different characters' consciousness and offer some perspective on those characters. In this case, a lot of Frankie Landau-Banks. Also, humor. Now, I realize humor is subjective, but I personally find the humor in this novel to be sharper and funnier than the humor in this one. For example, Alabaster Prep is a great name for a bastion of white male privilege. Alabaster is a translucent white mineral used in monuments. It is often used for tombs, as in Emily Dickinson's poem, Safe in Their Alabaster Chambers. So the school venerates dead white guys. Right there in its name. I love her play with language, the imaginary neglected positive, gruntled as opposite of disgruntled, or parage as opposite of disparage. An idea that she acknowledges comes from P.G. Wodehouse. Her tone amuses me. Not surprisingly, a lot of these are games with words. I mean, big shock that the English professor likes a book that plays with language. I know. It's a good thing you're shutting down as you watch this, isn't it? Okay, it's time for a question. I want to focus a bit on the differences side, and specifically on gender. What questions does Frankie and the novel itself raise about masculinity and femininity? That is, how might it invite us to think critically about the gender roles that we're encouraged to inhabit? And by gender roles that we're encouraged to inhabit, I mean the acceptable versions of masculinity and femininity. What is expected of us if we are to behave in a way that is masculine or behave in a way that is feminine, especially the teenage embodiments of those. Point to a few examples from the book. And one last question for part 2 of our discussion. If she landed in The Catcher in the Rye, or he landed in The Disreputable History of Frankie Landau-Banks, what would Frankie say to Holden? Third and final question for today. What is the panopticon? How does it work as a system of control? And what might it tell us about adolescence? Or, if you like, about Frankie? About how Alabaster Prep works? You can find the answers to at least some of these questions on pages 53 to 56. I advise you to cite them generously. And those are our discussion questions for today. I look forward to seeing your answers. Don't forget, for the next class, finish reading the novel. Okay, talk to you next time.